So welcome everyone again. So today we are going to talk a little bit about single vendor versus best of breed. Now, both Graham and I, and probably most of you as well, we engage customers and companies on a daily basis where we have different discussions. And these days, very often within the context of what are we going to do if we migrate from ECC to S4. It's a big exercise, and we see that companies then really consider what we're going to do. Are we going to keep wall-to-wall SAP, or are we going to make some changes? So that's the reason, that was the inspiration for this session. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, as always, standard introductions. So for the ones who have been here before, so I'm you probably already know me, but for the ones who haven't been, so I'm Christophe Derdijn. I've been in the IT industry for way too long. I look young in the picture, but I'm actually not that young. A lot of experience in business shared service transformation, outsourcing, offshoring, and helping companies adopt the right solutions for their needs. Together with me, I have Graham. And Graham, I'll let you introduce yourself. Probably everyone already knows you, I guess.
For those that, thanks, Steve. For those that don't, my name's Graham Storm. So I've been in the SAP consulting industry since probably the mid '90s, and even before then, I was an end user that implemented R2. So my picture's even older than Christoph. So very much spent a lot of that time in senior delivery roles as well as pre-sales roles for a lot of the major partners, and also obviously SAP themselves on a number of occasions. So love having these chats and looking forward to an interactive chat.
All right. So Graham and I, we together run the services arm of Icon Consulting. Now, who is Icon Consulting? So Harjit is the guy actually who started Icon Consulting in 2017 or early 2018, as if I have it right. And initially, Icon was mainly focused on enabling through skill augmentation, which is basically making sure that everyone who is implementing SAP or Oracle or Microsoft solutions get the right skills at the right time. Now, in 2023, we decided, or Harjit decided, to look broader, and I started in 2024. And together with Graham, we kicked off the services arm for Icon Consulting Group, focused on the SAP ecosystem logically. In conjunction with our staffing arm, it gives us a lot of strength and capabilities because of the strength of the network that we have. So we basically have an offshore delivery center in Vietnam where we are building an extended team, and we deliver services across APJ in the markets that you see here. Specifically, managed services, DevOps around BTP, but also S4 public cloud implementations. So we have a few very big engagements that we're currently running, one of which is an S4 public deployment to a company with 120 countries, which, as you can imagine, is probably has its complications and is a pretty dynamic affair. We aim to complete that one in 2.5 years. So let's see, we're about halfway now. Now, I always like to start these things with a bit of history and how did we end up where we are. Hey, get a poll yet again. So in the early days, this is basically how we ran companies before we had software. Everything was paper-based, everything was communication, so we need to check back and so forth. So this is basically the complexity that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And of course, today it's software-enabled, but in the past, all of this was super inefficient. We need to send each other's letters, or we need to have a phone call, or when we got email, we started to send email and so forth. But very often, this is a complex process where a lot of things are disjointed and difficult to manage. So complexities that we deal with is maintaining a single record, making sure that everyone speaks the same language, understands the same situation in the same fashion, and works with the same data. So that is actually the key purpose of anything that we do in organizations. So we need to connect everything. And the ideal outcome is something that looks a little bit like this, where you have a central database that connects everyone and everyone works with the same information. Sorry for the typo in financial data exchange there, but that is something I still need to clean up. So the dream is that we have an ERP where every single department is fully connected and is talking the same language, is giving the same information to everyone. Now, if you have any experience working with software systems and ERP solutions, you will understand that that is utopia. It's not something that we typically will achieve, but we can move towards it, and we can make sure that we actually get a lot of automation through through a centralized database, making sure that everything is as well connected as it reasonably can be.
Yep. I think on that slide as well, Christoph, it also shows that it's an enabler for, you know, cross module reporting, AI capabilities. It sort of enables all of that because it's sitting in a single environment.
True. And I mean, that's one of the things that I didn't really touch on a lot on the evolution in AI. There's a lot to be said in that area. There's a lot of exciting developments. They're not, well, they're evolving, let's say.
Evolving, yeah, absolutely, on a daily basis.
The real value is still not really there in many areas, but it's exciting to see what is happening, especially in the AI and for reporting and so forth. Now, when we look at how we run organizations, there are some things that are what I call the forever problems. And master data, I mean, I just made reference to that company where we're doing the rollout of public cloud. Master data is a big problem there, and it's a big problem in pretty much every single customer that I've seen. Graham, you're currently engaged also in a very large implementation. How is it going there?
Yeah, probably our two main challenges, and we're only a couple of weeks from our go live, and our two main challenges, which is very relevant for this conversation, are master data and integration. So we are predominantly very much SAP across the board. So not just you know RISE, but also obviously the complementary solutions within SAP. But even within that environment, data is still very, very complex and a major challenge. And because you have data in multiple sources, and yes, you have capabilities to synchronize them and all of that, but then you're getting into source of truth conversations, you're getting into security and privacy conversations, and that only gets further complicated if you start going down a multi software vendor, you know, solution, which I've had in previous projects as well, which complicates it even further.
So master data, I think everyone will recognize, or even data in general, making sure it's all aligned is always a challenge. Now, the second thing is one size fits all. From an IT perspective or from a technology perspective, we like to just give one application, maintenance is easy and so forth. But from an end user perspective, it may not be ideal, or it typically isn't ideal. Users don't like to use just one application for different purposes. So one size doesn't always fit all. It's not very much appreciated because usability is a challenge. And I mean, in every conversation that you have, when you implement any new system, usability is a key consideration, and complex systems that need to cater to many different needs, they're typically complicated to learn and to adopt. If you look at SAP, it's very versatile, but getting users to use SAP effectively takes time. So the usability is always a bit of a question. Now, the consequence of platforms not catering to the needs of, or to not perfectly catering to the expectations of users is that everyone loves Excel. So you see that people build their own little databases, their own little tools, and their own little everything around the core. So there is a lot of stuff that will still happen outside of your systems. And that's actually not something that you want. But again, this is prevalent. I think Excel is probably the most used tool pretty much across any organization, or Google variant of Excel and so forth.
Yep.
So
Chris, one question. Just SAP, wherever there SAP ERP, right? SAP says, read me as you please, but don't write to me. And when we are dependent on ERP data, then integration becomes a big challenge. And I think one question that we need to answer is, why is the monopoly of integration only with SAP, right? That's being a devil's advocate, right? So if that is solved, then I guess a lot of doors open. I don't know if I could convey the point across.
Well, actually, it's not just SAP, right? I mean, you have Oracle, you have Workday, you have a whole bunch of. Yeah, I mean, there's a few big players who offer a similar vision of a wall-to-wall my solution. And of course, we mainly work with SAP, but generally, it's not just SAP that pitches this story.
Yeah, and I think that further gets complicated with the evolution. Even if you look at SAP, the way it's evolved, it used to be a single ERP, and now with the evolution of Concur and SuccessFactors and Ariba and all of those other applications, which are part of the SAP family, but still they come from a legacy application perspective. So there is still integration there. Yes, it's supported and warranted by SAP, but you still do get some challenges with that, and that's just within the SAP suite itself.
I think if I can chip in on that, every few years, some vendor comes along and says, "We've solved the integration problem." Plug and play, or whatever sales pitch it is. No one's ever solved that, and the most I've ever seen any suite of software from any vendor is a maximum 30% integrated between the modules to support the business processes you actually need in reality. Once you've actually designed your business processes and you work out what integration you need, it's 30% at maximum out of the box integrated. So you've got to assume that from the start.
Funny you say that, John. A friend of mine just joined Workato recently, and he's just told me that Workato solves everything for everyone. So
yeah, well, magic.
Apparently, that is the way forward.
At least in the old days, the sales pitches used to be somewhat believable. Now we've gone into fantasy world.
Exactly.
I mean, Salesforce is the same. I know a whole bunch of people who work with Salesforce. It's the same, and it's because every business process is different. Every organization is different. You configure systems differently. You use data in a different way. The context is different, and all of that comes to a head when you try and integrate. There's no magic box for that.
Yeah, it's funny. And I am referring to, sorry, Graham, actually used to work for Salesforce. So a couple of years ago, MuleSoft was the answer to everything.
Right.
Ah, yes.
Nothing at all linked to his employment, but now Workato is the answer to everything.
And I think that used to be one of the sales pitches. I know we always used to have that sales pitch of SAP versus Oracle. SAP was the integrated solution, and Oracle was always bespoke, add-ons and add-ons. Yes, they had the integration connectivity, but now that advantage that SAP had is diluted quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it's careful of the insurance salesman you buy the insurance policy from him. It's always the best one.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, Yugandhar here.
Yeah.
I think integration also has become like. Sorry, I was just saying that integration has evolved so much in the recent past, right? I mean, there are like at least 12 integration technologies from SAP alone, and there are other ecosystems of integration. It all depends, I guess, how real time, how near real time, whether it's a one-way transfer, two-way transfer, synchronous, asynchronous, batch, queued. So each one of these technologies, if not understood well by the implementation company, they will end up implementing something that they know. And MuleSoft is a good tool is a good ETL tool end of the day. I mean, it just works well with one-way transfer. And two-way transfer may not necessarily be real time. It has to depend on some periodic transfers, batch transfers, because one important thing to consider is which system is the controlling system when it comes to integration. Yeah, I think that's the point that even a lot of consulting companies miss, and they try to invent adapters And a lot of these
Yes.
companies which say plug and play, a while ago somebody said plug and play, they sell the plug and play idea, but they don't tell you, what is the controlling system for the data it needs. Yeah. So
Yes, correct. Agree with the Lokanath. Yugandhar here. The clean core concept reduces these issues to majority, whether it is one way or two way transfer. And just quoting to an example of Oracle also. For the scheduling, generally we use the Primavera, right? For scheduling, it is one of the Oracle products. Where we in my recent projects, I was recommending RSH, and what are the features you are getting from the Primavera P6. We are accommodating all those features with the RSH and giving the solution. It is sometimes we are minimizing the integration with the clean core concept, and in some other cases we are completely avoiding the software and making it into centralized to SAP. This is the approach adapted and giving fruitful results on the for this.
Yeah, and that's one of the key considerations I think we touch on in some of the subsequent slides is to the impact of that, and that obviously needs to be considered very, very strongly when you are looking at best of breed versus best of suite or something in the middle.
Yeah, and so that best of suite concept, what Graham just referred to, is basically SAP's answer to the world moving towards best of breed.
Yes.
Because SAP themselves, through acquisitions, they have replaced their HR, they have replaced their CRM, they have replaced and so forth and so forth. So it used to be one big box, which was wall-to-wall SAP and catered to any need. But today they can't do that anymore because of the move to cloud and so forth. And now they call it best of suite, which I'll leave in the middle if it's always the best possible solution. But at least it's the concept that they currently push.
Yep.
Now, I think a lot of the things that we do are a consequence of what we can do in terms of solving organizational needs. So there is a number of technology considerations, and I've put a timeline together of some inflection points over time, because the pendulum swings, and you can typically see you start in one point, then you go to you evolve to another, and then you go back to where you were. So we
yeah, this is. Sorry, you go, Christoph. Sorry.
Yeah, we started off with client server environments in the mainframe days in the 70s. And then we moved to single vendor solutions, end-to-end integrated, because of the need to cater to that full integration picture and so forth. So over time, more capabilities become available. And in the last 15, 20 years or something like that, we have these moves to cloud, SaaS software, cloud native software, and so forth. And then you can see, because of the fact that in the cloud, we can do so many more things than what we could do in monolithic software. So you have point solutions which are tremendously much better for particular needs than in these big environments. You can see that people are more and more leaning towards adopting smaller solutions. And the concept that was coined by Gartner is composable ERP. And that's something that, Graham, you have a lot more background on than I do. So recently we talk about the concept of composable ERP versus the monolithic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And I think that composable ERPs, we sort of touched on it earlier, they're smaller solutions compared to, the R3s and the ECCs of the world from an SAP perspective. You still have that, that core function within SAP, but now you've got the solutions that are smaller, more manageable, much more richer in functionality as well. If you think of the ECC days, trying to put all of that, I'll use HR as an example, all of that HR functionality with PA and org management and training and everything into, what was an ECC solution, it just would fall over. Because it's integrated with all of the other, solutions as well. So I think the natural progression of not only moving to cloud, but moving to these smaller componentized type solutions, even though they're fully integrated within the core SAP through its various integration technologies, is what we're seeing, and it allows those smaller solutions to stay much more standardized as well and clean core, rather than trying to heavily customize a single instance of SAP.
So the question is then, are we going back to basics? And Graham, you just mentioned this is the slide that pretty much, I guess, everyone in this call has seen 100 times over.
Yeah.
So on the left-hand side, we basically try to do everything, and we ended up in a customization trap. It's difficult to maintain systems and so forth. SAP is pitching clean core, but the clean core is what? How different is the clean core concept from using a best of breed concept? So you need to do your integration. You have your custom applications. Do they then all need to be SAP or not? And this is basically a bit the considerations that we would be looking at. So the question is then best of breed versus best of suite. And to that end, I've put some information together on watch outs, the good and the bad, on the difference between the two. So we have, in terms of best of breed, I think, well, all of us, I'm pretty sure that everyone in the call can easily read, so I'm not going to read up everything that is there. But if you look at the best of breed solutions, the key difference is if you have a best of breed landscape, you will typically enjoy much faster innovation cycles. You can use more fit for purpose solutions, and you're more flexible. So as a consequence, most likely your end users, if you execute it well, your end users are going to be a lot happier because they use the best solution for a particular need. And for business outcomes, this is obviously going to be a lot better as well, because you will be much more effective in your execution and so forth. So in principle, it sounds really good. Now, what are the drawbacks, or what are the real challenges? And I think it was Loknath that mentioned that there as well, is you need to think about your overall architecture. Oh, it was John also. It's you need to think before you do. So how are you going to integrate? What kind of architecture are you going to have? How are you going to manage your data flows? How are you going to make sure that you have that proper exchange of information, one way, two way, and so forth? What is your master of records and so forth? So you need to make a very strong emphasis on architecture, on end-to-end governance, and those things you need to put in place before you actually start buying systems. Because if you buy the systems and you try to solve it later, it may be impossible, or it may be a big challenge. Also, in a hybrid or a best of breed landscape, you will need to deal with a lot more vendors. So your vendor management becomes more complex. There's a lot more overheads to be managed there and so forth. And sometimes these vendors may even be acquired and cause you all kinds of other problems that you don't control. So there is pros and cons in this.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, and I think you had a slide earlier, Christoph, around usability. And I think with best of breed as well, if you put your user hat on and put a change management hat on, getting consistency, you know, in the users are going to go, I want that screen to look like that screen. And if they're two totally separate systems, it's almost an impossible solution. So you then start, you know, factoring, okay, I've got to tweak that solution, put a front end on it so they look the same, irrespective of what system sits at the back end. And that just takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and potentially a lot of money to try and please users just to make sure they're using it in the right way.
True. So then we have the best of suite. Now, today, best of suite is not as the old ECC days. It's not a fully integrated system. It's basically a composition of systems which are connected out of the box, supposedly, John, by SAP. And so in the best of suite scenario, you basically have one ERP system with standardized integration out of the box by whoever is the software vendor, SAP, Oracle, and so forth. Now, one advantage, which I do actually strongly believe, is our back office processes are typically not that exciting. Pay an invoice, you need to do a payment, you need to collect your money and so forth. Typically between companies, there are no major differences in general, and there is exceptions there. Now, if you use this one ERP, you can drive standardization of processes a lot easier than if you use these best of breed solutions. So it can be a force for standardization in an organization, which can be beneficial. You need to deal with one vendor, and that again can be good, can also be bad. It depends a bit, because the moment that you have one vendor, your procurement process is easier, management is easier, and so forth. But they do get leverage. They know that you don't have too many options if you are wall to wall standardized on one vendor. Now, and I wrote it here with a bit of a quotes: system landscape for upgrades is simple. Now, if you are on one single vendor and you execute it right, you implement in the right way, you avoid customizations and so forth, in principle, upgrades should be easier because you have less integration risk and so forth. If you don't adhere to that, I mean, then we have again the customization trap. So that's something that will always causes headaches. And I think an important one in some organizations is critically important, especially the larger they get, the more predictable they want to be. If you know upfront the TCO over a long life cycle of your platform, whereas if you work with point solutions, you can never be sure because you need to manage so many different things, and there is always a lot more flexibility in that.
Yep. And I think also from a support perspective as well, it become a little bit more complex with best of breed, because you got multiple solutions, so you need multiple skill sets as part of your support in your IT organization as well, versus if you are just single best of breed using SAP stack, then you've got a common resource pool there for support and maintenance and IT.
That's fair. I mean, I was talking to a prospect recently, and they were considering to move to a different ERP, and not a very large organization, a couple of hundred people that were using SAP, but the migration process technically is not that complex, but shifting the enablement of the people from SAP to whatever was a prohibitive factor. So you make a very good point there. So
I think as well though, don't just think from a product perspective. When it comes to support, functional support, understanding the context of the solutions you've implemented is very important. And even though you may have implemented clean core, but built a whole bunch of clever stuff in BTP, for example, you built something clever for finance, you built something clever for procurement to automate a bunch of processes, you built something really clever for logistics, you've still got to have the teams that understand the business context of those things and can support them. So, okay, very technical support in one way is simplified, vendor management simplified, but your support organization and your ITIL, the complexity of supporting that might be just as bad because you built all of this stuff around it.
Yep.
True. I mean, and that kind of ties into the remark that is the first one mentioned on the disadvantages. If you work with one vendor, you don't get 100% solution. And I mean, with BTP and so forth, SAP kind of mitigates that because it's a kind of a toolbox, so we can do a bit more and so forth. So you can close the gap. But in principle, yeah, if you standardize on the solutions of one vendor, then it will be decent and sometimes good, but it may not be excellent in all areas. So it can't be ticking every single box.
Yep.
Now then, what's happening in the last decade? I mentioned earlier the pendulum swings. So we started off with a centralized system with terminals, then we moved to client-server environments, then we moved to application landscapes where we have one ERP that tries to do it all. And over the last decade, especially with the advent of the cloud solutions, we see that companies are moving more and more towards hybrid models, so further away from the single source or the single vendor. And this Nucleus Research is a research company. What I found interesting is for the core or the historical core of SAP, which is the finance modules, there was actually not much concerns. But if you look at companies that use SAP wall to wall and they have the SAP supply chain modules, there more than half of the customers that were using these actually considered to look into different solutions the moment that they need to migrate onto the newer version of SAP. And that's this research, it was 2019, if I recall correctly. So 2019, not yesterday, but fairly recent. And I think it becomes more and more relevant today. Every discussion that we have, I see companies that are going, you know, it works, but it's complex to implement. It has taken so much time. We've heavily invested, but now we need to redo it all. Maybe we can just go for a core SAP that does the hardcore backend finance and materials management. And beyond that, maybe better for us to have a more lightweight solution that we then integrate and so forth. So we see in many conversations, I see these same things come up. And for me, one thing there also is cost. Companies that see what they will need to pay when they go to RISE, for instance, versus what they used to pay in their old environment, there is a big difference. And this makes people think. So when they need to redo a lot of things anyway, options open. Now
it's an interesting one, and I've seen that exactly the same. Either whether you're doing having a conversation with a customer or whether you're doing implementation, certainly that operational element that you talk about around manufacturing and supply chain, it's the key conversation. No one talks about finance or procurement being a differentiator as to whether you go SAP or or Infor or any of those best of breed solutions. It's always the operational element that's the conversation starter.
Yeah, that's true. And in terms of examples, I mean, I was looking where companies are moving from single vendor to a best of breed. And most of the examples that I found very quickly are in the supply chain area. APO, I don't know how it's with the people in the call, but most discussions that I've had with companies that used to have APO or that are still having APO, they're not really looking at what is the new one?
IBP.
IBP.
Thank you. So many companies are not looking into IBP. They're actually looking at much more fit for purpose solutions, some of which you see mentioned here. Transportation management, same story. So companies are moving and getting rid of these older pieces of software where in the past they believed it would be better to integrate it. They have changed their mind and they understand the complexity of implementing these things and the need for having a fit for purpose solution.
There is a pattern to some of these, which I can explain for you if you like.
Oh yeah,
a lot of these companies you just put up are big global multinationals.
Yep.
And all of these companies, and I've kind of lived to tell the tale with the scars. I'm still in counseling, but I can tell the story. A lot of these companies will give you all the spiel, but the reality is, Unilever, Mars, DHL, which I know very well, Schneider Electric, which I know very well, all these companies, they've probably got so many SAP systems, they can't even count them. I remember having that rather embarrassing discussion with an IT department in Schneider Electric once, and they didn't even know how many SAP instances they had. They'd lost count. And the reality that in that organization, then, with something that big and that crazy, you're dealing with a totally different architectural requirement again, which is Something like Kinaxis is very good as a standalone platform precisely because it isn't integrated, because the quality of data, say you're getting on one product that you're manufacturing in China, shipping through Japan, shipping to Europe, and then selling in South America, you might have 10 different ERP systems involved in that process. So your master data's up the creek, your inventory's up the creek, everything's a complete mess. You actually need a disconnected system that's very best of breed, where you can manipulate all the data and you can really control what's going on. And that was the reason Schneider, for example, moved to Kinaxis over SAP, and I suspect some of these other people as well. So even though a big company can say they're a big SAP shop, in reality, they may be dealing with, an internal situation of chaos where they have so many different systems. Actually, they need to pull away from the SAP ecosystem and that level of integration in order to function.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, John. I mean, just recalling my own experiences. There's this global company that manufactures, inks for currencies and security papers, a German company. And their own companies are their own vendors or customers, depending on how you look at it. I mean, it's going through so many intermediate manufacturing steps in multiple countries, eventually to end up in various customers in various countries. Now, think about doing supply chain planning for such a company, which has, like, at any given instance in time, 270,000 SKUs, various colored shades. Exactly. They have to keep those SKUs, and that's mind-boggling. There's some company in India that is supplying them some dyes, and that company is supplying them to somebody. Unless they finish the supply chain planning, somebody in Germany cannot start. If they don't start, somebody in South America cannot start. Now, this is a case of not just a planning application which is centralized or network. It is so sequential that I'll tell you, none of these applications of today are tailored or designed to handle it, and it needs a different kind of thinking. Now, one thing that SAP did well in the past was it at least supported the idea of global planning and centralized planning, because it can distinguish source systems. If you have 25 ERP systems, you have 25 ERP systems in 20 odd countries. The system of planning, AP or IBP today, can differentiate where the data came from, but it still don't like centralized planning. That depends on which part of the globe you're from. Americans believe decentralized planning. European companies typically tend to centralize everything. So
you can make something like IBP at the top of that pyramid globally work, but everything underneath it needs to be
below it.
Data, processes, organization, people, roles, identity, the works. So in order to get to that takes, some of these companies have still got 20 years of work probably to get there.
Yeah, I think from a supply chain planning perspective, the next paradigm is still, this whole sequential planning paradigms are not supported by most of these. To an extent, Kinaxis, with all this kind of instantaneous change of plans, is a good software for a single source system. But if there are multiple source systems, I don't know how it is set up in various companies.
You can't really get away from sequential planning, in my opinion, because S&OP is the most political, most complex, most financially risky process in your entire business. If you're a big manufacturer, that's it. That's where you decide how much money you're going to spend over the next 3 months on manufacturing everything, and what you're going to give, what you're going to take. And so it becomes extraordinarily political. So that process of alignment, that sequential steps across all the different parts of the organization, upstream and downstream. I haven't seen a centralized system that can support that yet. No one's built
that. But sequential, I meant one man's finished goods is another man's raw material, and that man's raw material is a finished good to somebody else. In different geographies within the same enterprise, and with 25 legal entities. Now, there are companies like that in the world with multiple legal entities. They have their own contract manufacturers in various countries, and that makes planning very, very complicated. So they also abandoned the whole idea of adopting something different, because it's beyond human comprehension to even figure out how to plan demand, supply, distribution. So
who knows?
And with AI,
that is coming. I mean, in that area, I think AI will start to play a role because it can crunch much bigger amounts of data in a much faster way, and make it much more insightful for us. But I think early days on that one still. Huh?
Yep.
Yeah. So
that brought us already to a bit on the things that we see, and we were talking through on companies looking into upgrading to S4. They don't only see a big cost picture, but they also understand the problems from the past. They need to do big investment and so forth. So it's logical that today we see a lot of conversations on companies moving or potentially moving or considering to move to a best of breed kind of setup. So a few things that we then say or that we understand that you need to consider on where you want to sit. And John, thanks for that explanation, because I always thought if you have a single vendor situation, I didn't consider that dimension on you may have 100 different SAP instances.
Yeah.
And you're a single vendor, but you're not a single system, and you still don't have one version of the truth. So in that sense, I didn't make that reflection. But if you look at where you want to go and sit with your organization, whatever you do, invest early in integration, data governance, and architecture. That is probably, also given the conversation that we just had, one of the most important considerations. So if you look at flexibility versus chaos, if you have strong architecture and operating discipline, and this I see many organizations go completely wrong. So you need structure and you need clear agreements on what you can and cannot do, but you also need a discipline on execute according to that. And I see many organizations run before they can walk. Try to do things, buy a few systems, put them in, don't properly integrate them, and then they suffer. So it's better to take the time, look what you have, see where you want to go, properly plan, put your structures in place, not just in terms of architecture, but also in governance and process, and then actually go and adopt solutions. So where you're going to sit in the end, in a hybrid, in a single vendor or a best of breed, it's going to depend a bit on what you are as an organization. Especially, it has the example here, a manufacturing firm. But if you're a cloud-based firm with selling digital products, you don't have all that complexity. You could actually create a constellation of best of breed solutions relatively easily, as long as you manage all the integration. So it's going to depend a bit on the organization that you are, where you're going to sit.
Yeah, I don't think there's any one size fits all. Even the project I'm on at the moment, even though they are predominantly wall-to-wall SAP, you've still got ServiceNow in the solution, in the architecture. You've still got Salesforce in the architecture. You've still got very specific country solutions that are there as well for tax purposes. So I don't think you'll ever get a one versus the other, and I think it's going to be horses for courses, and have a look at what you've currently got. As you said, Christoph, look at what you've currently got. Look at those key components around integration and data governance, and then obviously also maintenance of support of whatever you do end up investing in.
I'm gonna wrap the session for today, but I very much appreciated you guys being here and making it very interactive today. So thank you for that. I'm gonna wish you all a very nice day, and then I hope to see you in the next round, probably in the later part of November somewhere. We'll do one more webinar for this year. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Erby, for inviting, and thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, Chris. Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.